and welcome to our third talk of the Connect and Develop series for 2024. I am Peter Papagiannis, Alumni Relations Manager here at the University of Auckland. It's great to have you all here today as we discuss how to make networking work for you. And before I introduce our speaker and MC, I would like to highlight a great tool for networking, University of Auckland's Alumni Connect. This free online platform matches UOA students seeking career advice with alumni who are keen to share their experience and expertise. If you haven't already, I encourage you to sign up for Alumni Connect. And now for today's webinar, our speaker is alumnus and University of Auckland 40 Under 40 recipient in the Disruptor and Innovator category, Dr. Thomas Scelo. Joining Thomas today is our MC. Associate Professor of Marketing, Director of the MBA program, and Assistant Dean of Professional Programs here at the university, Dr. Michael Lee. With extensive experience in higher education and real-world engagement, Mike has taught marketing strategy, marketing research, consumer behavior, advertising and promotions, and advanced marketing theory to more than 5,000 students. At a broader level, Mike acts as an expert witness for legal proceedings and has provided expert commentary in more than 400 media engagements. On behalf of all of us here at the university, I'd like to say many thanks to Thomas and Mike for being part of this series. And to everyone joining us, make sure you take this opportunity to get your burning questions answered during today's talk. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for that, Peter. So before I start introducing Thomas, there's just a couple of housekeeping about how to get the most out of today's webinar. As you'll see on your screen, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom panel. Please submit your questions at any time, and we'll be monitoring them as we go. I also encourage you then to upvote any questions you find very interesting, as these will move to the top of our Q&A screen, because at the end of today's seminar or webinar, Thomas will be answering some of those highest rated questions. So now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's speaker. Born in France and with a passion for music, Thomas arrived in New Zealand to begin his doctorate as a result of an invitation from George Dodd, Professor of Acoustics at the University of Auckland. Now, he met Professor George while completing his master's in physics in France. So this is a great example of how connection unlocks opportunity. Now, with over 20 years of experience in architectural acoustics, Thomas is a specialist in acoustic design for performing arts and cultural buildings. He's worked in New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, China, and Europe on more than 60 performing arts venues. Recognizing the role mentorship played in the success of his career, Thomas is keen to share the same passion and values with students and younger colleagues. So, over to you, Thomas.
It's very interesting that I am invited to do networking because I'm not at all an expert in the subject. I just stumbled into it, and I have been a bit lucky, as Mike mentioned. So networking, make networking work for you. It's very much what happened to me. As Mike mentioned, I am expert in performing arts. These are sort of the projects that I'm currently working on. The concert hall, theaters, concert venues, and opera houses. Now, when I graduated from the university, I still didn't know what networking was. And in fact, when you're a student, you don't really think about that so much because the university provides you with that network of students and professors. And then you arrive in the business, and you have no idea how to go about it. And my perspective was very much like everyone else. I thought you had to be the smartest in the room and score a point every time there was a point to score. I also thought that you had to be noticed and remarkable at the same time, and that you should be the cause for celebration and nothing else. So you put your jacket and you try to be the alpha male, but you have zero experience, and most likely you end up putting your foot in your mouth. because you're already talking to someone who's part of your network, of your boss, and so you're not making any progress. And instead, networking, if you're not experienced, turned out to be a bit more like this. So it's actually just very lonely experience. You don't know how to go about it. You've got your screens and you see a million people achieving fantastic things. So you end up essentially stalking people online. And this is pretty much where most of us end up being if you don't have at some point some help. So I thought that was interesting because I essentially learned it a little bit the hard way. But what I've come out after roughly 20 years of 25 years almost of making very life-changing decisions and business decisions based on network and people you met, is that networking, well, first of all, it's not LinkedIn, right? So this stalking people on the internet is not building up your network, it's just building up a list of names that you've never had a connection with. Networking is knowing your village. Increasingly, every one of us work in very niche field, and each one of these fields, even though it might be global, ends up being a bit of a village that is distributed over the globe. And so networking is figuring out what's your knowledge. It's a process as opposed to an end. And knowing your village is knowing what's going on in your village and who you can trust, and know who knows what and what's going on, and maybe importantly for business is what is going to happen. This has existed ever since humans have connected with one another. It really predates LinkedIn. As an example of networking, it's Marie Curie with Albert Einstein. You can't really say they're getting it wrong. That networking is actually a prize knowledge, all of that, knowing your village, that actually opens the door for support and opportunities. So it's quite important. And all it is about is knowing who's doing what in your village. Now, in my experience, networking is not a blanket. It's not like the spider network. We often represented it. The University of Auckland has a fantastic tool where you get to see the working network from staff. It's a fascinating example, and I've picked one example from it. It's that graphic you see on the right-hand side. But to me, the network is multi-layered, and at the center of it is what I call the core. The core of your network are the people who have always been there, maybe, or are there at the moment for you. And the other people who will answer your call for help. If you have 2,000 connections on LinkedIn, maybe 3 of them are going to answer an email, a message you post that says, I need help. Most people are just there to stalk you or figure out where you are at and see whether or not you're a valuable competitor. Yeah, there's only a very limited amount. I call that the core. And that core of people you have a very strong relationship with, very solid, and it sometimes challenges the boundary between your personal and your business network. So examples of people like that is your favorite university professor who taught you, that you went to talk to, who knows a bit about your personal life because you had an essay that was a bit late and has followed you. You keep meeting them at some conference, or you keep going back there socially. It could be the greatest mentor that you had in your previous job. It could be an ex-client. And it can even be a competitor, but they are these people who will answer that message, I need help, on that you post. Ideally, family is not part of the network because, well, I'll come to it, but it complicates things, and you'll see later on. And very importantly, these people in part of your network, it's by mutual agreement only, right? It's not explicit, this agreement, but you can't force someone. So one example could be I call it the disappointing case of the boss's mate's son, where your boss has a mate who has a son who needs a job, and so you are being twisted to hire that person, and then you need to rely on that person, and that person you have no connection with, and ends up leaving the business after a year of full training, there hasn't been any connection being built, and you essentially have wasted quite a lot of time. So that happened to me. It's very hard for you to impose your network onto someone else, or for someone to force themselves into your network. It needs to be a mutual agreement. And that mutual agreement is not explicit. It's not like you shake your hand and say, all right, we're now part of the network. It just happens. It needs to happen naturally. Now, you call people, I call them the ambassadors. They are your ambassadors, or your representative, or your champion, if you want. And you've got a limited amount of them, but they all have their own network of people with whom you have no connection. I've represented them. So you're the red dot, and your core network is the blue dots, and every one of these blue dots has its own network of green dots, right? And the idea is that you let your ambassador make some of the work for yourself and introduce you. And then they might introduce you to someone in their network. And then the best part of the network is trying to figure out if you can turn that green dot into the blue dot, so that new person that you've met is a new ambassador. So the example is the lucky case of a friend, of a contact turning client. So you can see how it's always 2 or 3 levels in. I was living in Hong Kong, and I had one of my really good contact who called me and said, I have a friend who's moving to Hong Kong. Can you give them some indication of where to look for apartments in place? Because it's complicated and it's very expensive in Hong Kong. And so I sent an email, a 1-page long email describing someone I've never met, where maybe it's a good place to try to find apartments, and mostly to prepare them so that the expectation in terms of apartment size was not quite the same. And at the end, I said, "But look, I can book you a serviced apartment in my building, and I just go and talk to the manager and see how it goes." And it worked. And these people, they moved in, and they lived 6 months in our building, and eventually they became really, really good contact. And as it turns out, this person was moving to Hong Kong to be the head of the West Kowloon Cultural District Authority, where that represented the biggest share of my work. Maybe 80% of the business that I had started in Hong Kong was relying on that client. And all of a sudden, he was the technical director for that work. Unknowingly, I had found him an apartment for him and his wife. So yeah, it's the lucky case of a friend of someone turning client. He's eventually become a blue dot. Now, once you have that core network, you have to maintain it. It's like your friendship. You can't just rely on these people and expect them to step up whenever you need them to. So you have to maintain trust, and that means different things for different people. I'm not here to discuss necessarily that. I don't have any advice on that, but know that each relationship is unique. Do you remember I talked about this agreement and this mutual agreement, and every relationship with every one of your ambassadors is unique and different and built on different perspective and for different purposes. So you have to take care of that. My advice is, once you've got these 5-6 people, is to give them a call once a month to briefly give news about yourself, but mostly get news from them, and do that regularly. And the idea is you are there to call to see how they're doing and to see whether you can help them in their own journey. Now, it's not about helping people so that they owe you a favor. You hear a lot of that in the business environment. Oh, he owes me a favor. You don't say that about someone you actually care about. It's not about that. It's about maintaining that trust. It goes back to the first point. So the green dots, the contact or the acquaintances can owe you favor, but your ambassadors, they don't owe you anything. Except maybe some degree of loyalty, which is something very rare in the business world. Example of that is the tricky case of the competitor who's also an advisor. There is only a few people on the globe that actually do the sort of work that I do. And one of them is someone that I don't hesitate calling when I need advice. Even though we are competing for the same project and trying to steal contracts from another, we are in good enough terms and maintain that. So that's an important part of maintaining your contact, maintaining trust. He calls me when he needs something, and I call him when I need something, and it's a good exercise. Now, all of that is saying that it's your network is based on meaningful relationship. Business is not just business for these ambassadors, as far as you are concerned. They actually care about you, and you should be caring about them. Building meaningful connection is the most efficient way to grow the core of your network. So when these people introduce you to a third person, you have to be mindful. You have to listen with your ears, your eyes, every bit of yourself. You listen not to respond, you listen to understand and find out everything you can about this new person, including giving them the benefit of the doubt if they feel a bit fishy or they don't seem to be having the same values as you. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't kill the opportunity for a meaningful relationship right away. You could do your background check later on and keep your ambassador in the loop, especially if you found that the background check doesn't stack up. And I've learned that the hard way. So Danish, the example of the Danish lunch that became an Ethiopian opera. Very strange story. I'm living in Sweden, and I get in touch with a university professor from the DTU who has worked in the same field as me, and say, hey, let's catch up. We work in the same field. I just arrived in the country. I'll meet you in Copenhagen and we have lunch. And then we have lunch, and I try not to talk too much during that lunch. And what I picked up is like he was actually quite bored a bit and was excited to talk to me and excited to engage. So I called him another lunch, and we talked about work. I exchanged some ideas. I later on had to acknowledge him in a conference paper for that conversation over the lunch. And we actually build a bit of a rapport of respect. Later on, when he got a call from a Swiss acoustician who was looking for an expert in concert hall design, he gave them my name. And I did a competition for the Prague Concert Hall with their Swiss acoustician, who I've never met before and I had never heard of before. That same person ended up handballing a project in Ethiopia for a national opera in Addis Ababa to me because he couldn't take it. And so as a result of a Danish lunch, I ended up being contracted to design the national opera in Ethiopia. And all it took was giving him a call and saying, can I take you out for lunch? Because we're in the same business and I just arrived. The key bit is you don't actually need that much of an excuse to trigger people into having lunch with you or buying them a coffee. People are busy, but people are thriving for making relationships. Nothing's wrong with reaching out. And this is where maybe LinkedIn becomes interesting, is that you can reach out to people and say, can I take you for lunch? When are you next in my city? I'd like to have a coffee. They tell you that they're going to a conference. Maybe try to see if you can attend the conference for that. And you do that once to establish the relationship, and you can continue that, and that's how you maintain that relationship. Now, for every one of these connections that you make, this new connection that you make, these green dots in your network, you need to establish the level of hierarchy that that person can be. Not everyone is meant to become an ambassador. Some people are just there because that's their purpose. They are going to be green, and they're always going to be green. They'll be polite and answer your queries if they were your professional queries, but they are never going to be someone who you will think about inviting at your house for a barbecue unless you're doing a fundraising. So some relationships are for fast benefits and the others are for long term. Obviously, it takes a long time to develop someone into your ambassador. It's not someone that you can drop a business card at a corporate event and say, be my friend. It would take time for them to grow into liking you, into knowing what you can deliver, into doing what you're interested in, and for you to find out whether they have the same value or not as you do, so they don't recommend you for the wrong things. So essentially, this is the sense of the networking to me. And the main question is, how do I start when I have no contact, right? I mean, this was the most stressful part. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't have a silver bullet solution to it. But I have these tips, because I'm the worst person to be sitting next to during these corporate gala dinners. I'm petrified. I'm shy and rather introverted. I spend a good 10 minutes reading the menu, even though I don't actually care what they serve me. I'll be mostly following conversation as opposed to starting them, just because that's not my nature. I am not the guy who shows up. We've all seen them. Superbly groomed with 100 business cards with their name on it at the beginning of the event, and they walk away with 100 business cards of some other people. In my experience, this used to work maybe in the olden days. Now no one carries business card, so that strategy is kind of falling apart. And what you end up with your business card on your desk is you've got a big stack of people, half of them you don't remember, and you need to do a cold call later on and say, hey, we talked for 2 minutes at an event last year or 6 months ago, and I'd like to this time have a meaningful conversation with you. Very likely it would be unsuccessful. So the strategy you've got it here if you've started reading. So that crowd surfing attitude is really not for me. I'm nervous, as some people have mentioned. So what I do is I try to see if I can check the attendees before the event happened. And of these attendees, I'll write down a list of 5 or 6 names of specific target people that I want to reach out to. And then I found one other person who's an attendee. Maybe it's a work colleague, maybe it's another contact, maybe it's one of these green people or an ex-university student that studied with me or a friend, and say, can we go together? And so you meet at the door before you get in, so that when you walk into that big space full of people who all seem to be knowing why they're here and what's their purpose and what they're doing, and what's their objective and who to talk to, you have someone with you. So you avoid being that guy here, which is usually me in these conferences. I'm either underdressed or overdressed. I never feel like I'm part of the group, and I have no one to talk to. So I walk around endlessly for hours. if you have someone that goes past the gates with you, then you look like one of these other people, and that gives a bit of confidence. And then that other people's network will also mingle. And then maybe you'll bump into someone. All of a sudden, you're part of a group of 3 that could evolve into a group of 4, that could evolve into a one-on-one conversation. The other part is, once you've got this target, is send them a message. This is the most successful tip or attempt that I've done is, looks like you're going to that conference. It would be great to catch up. Here's my mobile phone number. And you send that as an email, or you send that as a LinkedIn. And if you get a response, then that's great. The moment you arrive, you can send them a text message and say, I've arrived. Let's meet at whatever, let's share a coffee. And all of a sudden, that's it. You have your contact. You can reach out. It's not people you drop on at the event, interrupt their conversation. It's people who know you're coming, and now you're on their radar. Nowadays, I receive these messages from people. Hey, you're going to that event, it'll be great to catch up. And there might be, 20 or 30 people that I know in the room, and I still remember there's 5 or 6 people who might have reached out. And I'm not going to turn them down. I'm not going to be rude. If they approach me, I'm going to try to figure out why and what they want. So these are the best tip that I can actually give you. Prepare for this event. Don't just think you need to go there. Don't think you need to say something smart. You can just be interested and a good person, and that's usually good enough. If you're interested in the subject, you're a good person, and you have some competence in your field, then quite likely the person is not going to say you're not someone I want to connect with. And that's the first step. Then you reach out, and then you give them the call. You ask them for coffee. You ask them what's troubling them, or what are they up to, and you see if you can help them. The key for your network is not to think of these people as some people who can do things for you, is to think of people that you can help, you can connect. The mysterious case of the disappearing graduate is a typical example. A few years ago, I took graduates to conferences in my field. And the 2 graduates that I took to these conferences, they both left my business within a month to go somewhere else. And the reason for it is because we did that exercise beforehand, and they follow through. Now, I've lost them, but they progressed, and I think that's the role of a mentor in some ways. The morality is like, yeah, you should send your graduate. If you want to keep them, just don't prepare them for that event. But if you want to help them, prepare them, and then they'll fly. And there's no reason why that wouldn't apply. If you can apply to graduates with no experience, just a good attitude, it can apply to anyone, I think. Yeah, this is the end of my talk, I think. I don't have, as I said, a silver bullet point. This is my experience. The last part that I might say is, in some of the questions that might come up, is it takes time to develop that core. And for me, as an introvert, nerdy scientific researcher, it's been about meeting people over and over again. Thank you. If there's any question, I'm happy.
Thank you so much for that, Thomas. That was really interesting. I was just reflecting on while you were talking that, in my capacity as Director of MBA and Assistant Dean of Professional Programs, one thing I can definitely attest to is the value and importance of networks. When our students enroll in a degree with us, we often say it's not just where you get your degree from and what you learn, but it's also who is getting or shares that same degree as yourself. And so I think networking is definitely important, and certainly a value add that people get when they enroll in any course, not just an MBA. The 3 key points that really resonated with me was the link that you had between stalking versus networking, or as you really eloquently put it, knowing your village. Maybe if there's some time at the end, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that distinction. A second point was a really interesting perspective about the importance of maintaining trust. rather than sort of this transaction of favors. I often say you want to dig that well before you get thirsty. And so I think you covered that really well. And lastly, I really love the fact that you're a self-reported introvert. You have that little picture of that lonesome person walking around. But obviously you've networked very well. So I think, you know, one of the benefits of an introverted sort of networking approach is that in some ways it might actually come across as a bit more genuine because you spend more of your time listening to the other person than telling them about yourself. So in some ways for those, and I noticed a few questions, for those of you that are nervous about talking or feel introverted, in some ways I think it's actually a superpower if you can get over the initial discomfort, because obviously once you can put yourself out there, you're probably a better listener than sort of this classic extrovert.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so those are my thoughts. Do you have anything to add before we move on to the questions?
No, I'd like to answer some of the questions. I think everyone have since, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, now if I click on the questions and go straight to the most upvoted ones. Okay, the first one is, what tips do you have to start to build the core of your network? I think you covered a little bit about this, so maybe just a summary.
Yes. Well, the core of your network is very small. If you're starting in the business or you're just coming out of the university, hopefully you have some degree of contact in your industry. And the best part of it is going to this industry event and pick the small ones. You don't have to pick the giant one in personal ones. Pick the small ones where people can't avoid having a conversation with you during the breaks, because there's 20 people in the room. When I was at university, every Friday, George Dodd organized Lunch Bunch, which was lunch shared. Everyone brought their own lunch, you know, bring your own plate, but we all gather in a room, and it's academics in the field of acoustics, but also consultants in the industry and product manufacturer, and anyone who's essentially welcome to join everyone on Friday. And sometimes there was a presentation, but it was very informal, and it was mostly about keeping up to date with each other. That's how I ended up finding my first job. For 3 years, these people saw me every Friday at lunch. So they had established that I was not a lunatic, that I was a bit serious, that I had plenty of things to say, but I knew when to not talk. And essentially, I was involved with properties about 30 years. That network has grown. Out of these people, I got 4 job offers, and all of them are from people who came to that lunch bunch at some point. So it's a slow process, but it's also an interesting one. And so go to these small events, small conferences, university events like today when they are in person, go for it. And do one-on-one if stressful public talking is stressful. One-on-one is the only way to grow your core or to turn someone into an ambassador, as I call them.
Yeah, that's probably a reassuring thing to hear for those people that are highly introverted or you know, feel exhausted in sort of these big crowds, which kind of relates to the next question I'm going to answer. Sorry, to ask, is how do you overcome nerves when approaching someone you don't know? How do you start that conversation?
Oh, I don't know. You approach someone, presumably you know who it is, and presumably you know what they do for a living. The good thing I've done is you stalk them a little bit on the internet before. If they're part of your target, you know what they're doing. And maybe recently their company or they won an award or something like that. And it's a really good way to saying, hi, Mike, it's good to see you here. I wanted to congratulate you for winning this MBA Professor Award. It's fantastic, and you must be very proud. End of talk, let them talk, and then ask questions. Listen so that you can find the next question, and then listen so that you can find the next question. And you're storing all that information. And at the end of the conversation, you know the name of their wives and when they got married. And then you store that. So that when it's his birthday, if it's his birthday in 2 weeks' time, send him a message. You're slowly growing. that conversation is kind of like almost meaningless in a way. It doesn't generate a business opportunity right away. It just starts putting a face on a name and creating a mean to reach out later on for business. That's
Because
yeah.
I just like to tell everyone my birthday was 2 weeks ago and I received no message from Thomas, so I'm very disappointed. So the next question is, this is a good one. I'm just a student. What help can I offer experienced business people to make this relationship two ways?
Oh, well, you're a student, so you're a sponge for knowledge. You work hard to get your degree. You're still in the work mode. You are easily mentored, and you are super eager to please them. Presumably, you're a bit smart. You got your degree, right? Who doesn't want someone like that? The only reason they don't give you a job is because they don't have a job at the moment to give you. And you don't have to offer any knowledge when you start your job. That's the thing. But you can offer the fact that you are an expert learner. Yes, what you've been doing for the last years is learning. So they have a job that they need to teach you, that you need to learn. That's exactly what they need. They need an expert learner.
I recall when we were getting ready for this this webinar, Thomas, you had a really fantastic story about how you know this very important first initial network that you had. You were a student with I guess not that much to offer either, if you from your own personal sort of viewpoint. How did that work for you? That was the one where the guy ended up, you popped into his office, and then you ended up like doing a postdoc with him or something like that.
Yeah. So I was still in France. I was doing a master, and as a French person, I had no English, and I thought, well, if I need to do some English, so I went to see my professor, one of my professors, and say, where can I go and study overseas? But I can't afford to take a year off just to study English. I need to move on. And he said, well, why don't you go and talk to George Dodd? He's on the 3rd floor, and he's here on a sabbatical. You can go there. And so I went to talk to George Dodd, and he was there with his wife in the office, and he opened the door. He was like super nice. And I thought, wow, if everyone from New Zealand is that nice, then it's a good place. And we started, he was speaking in French beautifully. And I said, can we switch to English? Because my whole point is that. And eventually said, why don't you try the University of Auckland? We have a fantastic acoustic lab, and you can come along. And it was about 6 months later, I was just landing in Auckland, still with zero English, but a big motivation.
Yeah.
So start with your professor. The reality is like your professor, you have two types of professor. You have the one who's always been an academic and only knows academic, and you've got one who's got connection in the real world outside the academy, as they call it. And that person has a much better idea of where it is that you can start fishing for contact.
Yeah. And that's a great story because, you were a student as well with, I guess from your perspective, not much to offer. And you couldn't even speak the language properly at that point, which I think resonates with a lot of people in the audience here. My next question is, what are some tips or suggestions on how to maintain the relationship?
That's the regular phone call, and making the objective of that phone call to find out if there's something you can do for them. The phone call is not to empty your bag and voice your frustration and ask for help. It's to find out if you can help them. That's how you maintain relationship. The same way you do with friends. If out of sight, out of mind, is that the expression? And it's pretty much the same. Make a point of having a conversation. You're in a taxi or you're out on a lunch, call someone you haven't talked for a long time who's in your network. I did that the other day. Literally, I did that 2 weeks ago, call someone I hadn't talked to in a year. As of last night, we're together on a competition for a concert hall project. And it was just this pleasure of reconnecting with someone and realizing that there was a reason why we connected so well in the first place and we missed out. So maintain them, help them out. They will help you back.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned also this boundary between your personal and business network. I've got a question here from Ricardo. What point does the business relationship become a friendship, and should you avoid that process?
I don't think there's anything wrong with a business relationship becoming a personal relationship, because that's essentially what happens when you're a student and you make friends at school. You make friends at university. You make friends. There's no reason why at work you cannot make friends. I think I'll put a bit more caution on the family network coming into your business network, unless you have. Unless it's part of your culture, but in a lot of circles, it's difficult to owe favor or money to family members, so yeah. But that's just been, I like to think that business is not business. I know maybe in the business or finance sector, it's like, don't take anything personal. It's all business. I take everything personal because I care about what I do and I care about the people. And I'm trying desperately in the 21st century to continue working based on loyalty, which is something that I value a lot, which is disappearing slowly. So, but that's just my stubbornness.
We've got time for a few more, and then I'll wrap up. This one's got a lot of upvotes. It says, when you're on your own at a networking event, where do you start? Do you just approach random people or groups? For example, I was told at one point not to approach pairs, as it's likely they could be in an intimate conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. In a pair, it's better maybe to wait until someone else barges in, and then it's a group of three. Nothing stops you from tapping someone on the shoulder and say, when you're done, can I have a word with you? And then you just hang around. And if they're busy or if they're going to run away, the people will tell you, and and that's when you don't take it personally. It's just people have their own schedule, and that's just a reality. It's not about you. It's mostly about themselves. Look, you can walk in a big group. No one will notice you here, and you can be start being part of the conversation. If you've been in that group and there's someone next to you who say, "Hi, I'm Thomas," and offer a hand to shake, everyone I know will shake the hands, right? That's it. You've introduced yourself. That's all it takes, right? If it happens to you, you will shake the hand of that person who just introduced themselves to you. There's no reason why it will not work for you at this stage.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Thomas. Shake hands to the person right next to you, and that's it. The rest of the group, you don't need to interfere. You don't bring attention to you, but at least you've introduced yourself, and now you belong to that group.
Great. Hey, thank you everyone for the questions. I noticed there's actually a few that are left over, but we couldn't get to them. Hopefully we still got a lot out of this. So once again, thank you very much, Thomas. This year, now I'm just moving on to some sort of closing remarks for the next Connect and Develop series. This year, for the first time, we're having an in-person event, which is a perfect opportunity to put exactly what we've learned about here into practice in terms of networking. Connect and Develop Live is happening in 2 weeks on Monday, the 5th of August. So make sure you check out the details and register to attend using the QR code that will be coming up next. It's been our pleasure. Thank you again, Thomas, to discuss this topic with you. And I encourage you all to get networking. All right. See you guys later. Thank you very much.